With only 2 weeks to go in our fantasy MLR league, there's a whole lot of playoff clenching, not clinching, going on in our league. Stay tuned to find out what we mean. The Fantasy Ruckers show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 17 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Man, we were just talking about before the episode, Vandy. Episode number 17, man. That's 17. Incredible. That's almost 4 months worth of episodes. And if you had asked us if we'd be still on a roll here 4 months down the line, I don't know, man. But this has been pretty incredible stuff. Hey, thank you so much for everyone tuning in. Like always, if you're one of our league members, if you're one of our community members, if you're just tuning along and trying to follow along this journey of making fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR, thank you so much for tuning in. Ryan Yee, Devin Vanderpool, as always, and of course, 2 weeks in a row, we're missing our third musketeer, Matt or Vandy. See, I'm even getting his name mixed up here. I'm missing him so much. We're missing our third dude here, and he's still. We mentioned last week that he had to go on a little bit of a self-healing, an Aaron Rodgers-esque self-healing trip because it's been such a rough season for him so far. He's still on that trip, but apparently, man, I don't know if you saw the results this past week. Something's working, dude. I don't know if it's the crazy.
I think I might have to go to this retreat, man.
Right? I don't know if it's what crazy rituals he's got going for the fantasy rugby gods or whatever, but it's something seemed to work this past week. We're gonna break it all down: the fantasy matchups in round 13, the MLR matchups in round 13. But Vandy, before we get into it, a jam-packed show. How are you feeling? You're now a 13-week vet into this, man. You feeling like you're a 13-week vet?
I'm also last place now. But aside from that, I mean, the comfortability's there. The problem is I think the rest of the league is a little bit more comfortable. But, yeah, man, just still having a blast. You know, it's still fantasy, still fun to be in it.
And I will say, right, I get that. I get the fantasy season's been a little bit tough for both you and Maddie. Now, mind you, that I don't think that's indicative of your skill level or any of that. I mean, fantasy can go both ways for really skilled people and not so skilled people. You know that from playing in all the fantasy sports that you've played in. But I think also we're in a little bit of a treat here, both in the fantasy world and in the MLR world. You mentioned it at the top. I mentioned it at the top of the show. You heard it in the teaser. I mentioned there's a whole lot of playoff clenching going on. You're probably like, you heard that and you're probably like, what the hell does he mean with that?
Ryan, you know what you're saying here, bud?
No one in our league as of yet, and we're going to dive deeper into this later on in the show when we get to our classic Commissioner Yee's classic update of the league that everyone I know loves to wait for. But there is the playoff race heading down into both our fantasy rugby season and in the MLR season, man. It's coming down to the wire, man. And like I mentioned, it's a whole lot of no one's locked in any spots. It's a whole lot of holding your breath and clenching, man. Kind of the similar feeling that I'm having right now with a subtle plug here, my Toronto Maple Leafs playing in the NHL playoffs. I'm gonna feel this way the entire way through. A whole lot of holding my breath and a whole lot of clenching to as we await the results of these playoff results, both in the fantasy world and in the MLR world, which we're going to break all down here in this episode. So, like I mentioned, breakdown of the round 13 results, how that implicates the regular season going forward. But before we get into any of that, as always, guys, if you're listening, make sure you throw us a like, a follow, a subscribe, both on YouTube, both on if you're listening on the podcast. It really helps us out. Leave us a rating, leave us a comment, join in the discussion. We've had a lot of fun with the people. The classic shout out to Vandy's beer of choice here. But yeah, it really helps us out, and we love seeing the conversation going on. If you want more of that conversation, you can go into our Discord channel. That link is below in the comments, both if you're listening on the podcast and on YouTube as well. It's been a lot of fun, and we mention it every week. If you're joining and following us on those channels, you will be first to know if we are able to expand this project into more than just one league. And I know that we have a lot of people asking if we have free spaces to join this fantasy MLR project, and as of right now, we don't. But if you do follow us on socials, you'd be first to know to lock in that spot, because I know it's been a lot of fun for the 8 people that have been in this league so far this season. So with that being said, Vandy, we're going to break down the round 13 fantasy matchups. It was a lot of fun. I think there was a lot of tight matchups, a lot of meaningful matchups that had a lot of effect on the playoff races, like I said. But let's break down some news and notes here that we've learned over these past few days. I feel like the news over the flurry of news that we had at the start of the season, I feel like week in, week out, as we start to get settled here, there's a little bit less, but that doesn't mean there isn't stuff that we need to talk about. The first that has
like
fantasy
suspensions, man. Like it just seems like that's all that's new lately. Just
honestly, right? And people just getting a little bit feisty, I guess, waiting for playoffs. But yeah, let's get right into it. Let's talk about some of these suspensions. We mentioned it a little bit last show, Vandy. Jerry Labuschagne. He got that red card a couple weeks ago. They were on bye this past week, but we were waiting on kind of the decision that was there. And despite having faced a red card earlier in the season, it seems that doesn't have any effect on the second red card that he's facing. So it's just going to be another 3-game suspension that he will be facing. So I believe he was dropped by Steven in our league. But if you were looking at him as a potential maybe waiver wire pickup, him coming off of bye, something to think about. He's not going to be available until at least the finals of our fantasy rugby playoffs. So I'm not too sure if you're going to be banking on that. So big fantasy impact there, because he did have an impact for a little bit of a stretch there. It seemed like he was scoring some tries there. So Jerry Labuschagne, not going to be fantasy relevant, I would say, for the rest of at least our season. And then the other suspension, the more relevant suspension, the more recent suspension that happened in round 13. Man, I don't know if you saw this, dude, but Hanko Gramicius getting a red card, and it was a pretty unnecessary red card. I mean, it's one of those plays. It's a heat of the moment type deal. Yep. I could kind of understand it. You know, you want to get like a little shot in. It's a physical match between 2 top teams. But man, Hanko, you really did not need to do that. And now you're hurting your team for the long run now, heading into this playoff race, because you're not going to be there for the next few weeks for this Giltini side. Thoughts, Vandy, on the red card that you saw that is now obviously 3-week suspension, won't be around for just under the next month?
You know what? I thought it was a well-deserved card. I'm a big fan of the TMO, and I guess not necessarily the TMO here, but the ref coming over. They chatted out, they watched it together. It was blatant. He kind of argued it, didn't really have a dog in the fight, but you're always going to argue it. You're always going to have passion. But, I mean, they got it right. 3 games. I mean, it's all in line. I think, like I said before, like I'll say it again, rugby is on point with these suspensions. They're needed. They're well done. And, yeah, I thought they were on point.
And you know, Vandy, too, that when it comes to anything near the head, no matter how severe, right? It might even just be a little love tap. You know what I mean? It might just be a subtle, a small punch that you don't think anything of. But when it comes to head contact, the league is not going to play any of that, no matter how light you may think it is. So this is obviously aligned with that. So 3-week suspension for Hanko Gramicius. That's big, man. I can't 100%. Remember who owns him in our league. I'm going to do a quick little search here. It is, huge, man. Malcolm owns Hanko. He's in a big race here. He was kind of running away with it at the top of our league. It's gotten a lot tighter so far. He's been a big part of that Hanko Gramicius, and now he's not going to have him.
Barrett, but I mean,
but I mean, still, Hanko was huge for especially that little stretch when the Giltinis have been so good as of late. He's been a big part of that. I mean, you can recall that big truck he had against, I want to say, Fuatai a couple weeks ago when they played Rugby New York. So he won't be around until at least our fantasy Ruckers playoffs, the final actually of that league. So that's huge, man. And the question will be too, Vandy, when Hanko does come back for, let's assume, right, that Malcolm makes it to the final.
Yep.
Do you trust Hanko slotting him right back into the lineup? I mean, with a name that big, maybe you do.
Yeah,
but
I would think you're pretty safe there, but I know
it's good. You're going to have some doubt. You're going to have some doubt going into it. But that is definitely an interesting. I just want to remind everyone out there as well. I keep on saying fantasy. I keep on saying playoffs. And I want to make sure that it's not confused when I say our fantasy playoffs. So our fantasy playoffs is starting in week 16. So our regular season goes till the end of week 15. I know that in the actual MLR, the season runs 18 weeks, but in order to capture the highest level of competition into our fantasy playoff season, we wanted to end the regular season at week 15 and have week 16 and 17 as our playoffs. So that's why it appears that we're obviously having a earlier playoff session, which is typical of other fantasy sports as well, that you can speak towards Vandy and fantasy football, fantasy baseball, fantasy hockey, what have you. So yeah, interesting with Hanko Gramicious. Obviously that's going to have a ripple effect in our fantasy league. So those are with suspensions that we saw of, and like Vandy said, it seems like there's a brand new one each and every week. So we'll see whether or not the round 13 will bring a few more of those that, if it's a big name player, like we said, will have a big time impact. Now, quickly moving on, something on a more positive note here, Vandy, and not suspension related. I'm not sure if you knew, but the D1 National Collegiate Championship for rugby happened over the weekend, and it was pretty exciting, man. And for those of you that maybe weren't aware, it was Army Black Knights, the Army Black Knights. So that's the Army Institute down here at West Point, taking on the St. Mary's Gales, two very formidable rugby programs. And man, it was an exciting matchup. Came down to the wire. Hard-nosed, gritty, exactly what you'd expect from two physical sides known like Army, like St. Mary's. 20-8 victory for Army. Pretty big win. The entire match was streamed on the Rugby Network. So if you missed it, you can go back and watch the entire thing on the Rugby Network, which I think is really, really cool. Especially with a high profile game like this, where you want to grow the sport in North America, you want to highlight some homegrown talent, and a lot of that comes from the collegiate system. So this is a perfect way to do it. So if you didn't catch that, make sure to check that on the Rugby Network. Really exciting game, 20-8 victory, like I said, for the Army Black Knights. Vandy, obviously, you've been brand new to this sport. I would highly recommend that you go check out this game. And for everyone listening, for everyone watching, it's also a really cool opportunity to kind of see some of the best players, like I mentioned, that is grown home side that you may see in a season's time that may be partaking in the next MLR draft. You watch games like this, you kind of get familiar with some of the names, just adds to the whole thing. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. It was nice to see that content was available for rugby viewers here North American side, and for anyone maybe overseas that was interested in it as well, because I know there's some people even overseas that can't get enough rugby content. So this was something else that they could get their hands on as well. That definitely lived up to the expectation. So that was a big one also over the past week. And then the last one here, Vandy, was not so much positive, not so much negative, but just something to take as note. It was tweeted out that KXAN News, the partner with the Austin Gilgronis, television partner, has decided to break their contract. I guess Gilgronis games were being aired locally on KBVO, a local sports channel that they have down there. Not really anything crazy, because the games are obviously available still on the Rugby Network, which is the main way people have been digesting these games, but not exactly what you want to see in a game that you want to see growing. You don't want to necessarily see TV partnerships being broken. Now, whether or not this has anything to do with the drama that we were discussing earlier in past episodes with Adam Gilchrist and kind of the ownership battle, with the Gilgronis there. That's just me reading between the lines. There's nothing that I saw that it had to do with that, but it is coincidence. It is interesting.
The best team in the MLR too. I mean,
right, exactly. But they're doing so well, and it seems like from a entertainment value, and even Vandy, from watching the game on the Rugby Network, it seems like the stadium's pretty packed. It seems like the Gilgronis have a pretty strong local following. So yeah, this is kind of out of the blue. Not exactly what you want to be seeing, like I said. But to kind of add a positive spin to this, a different team that's kind of saw the opposite thing is Rugby New York announced a partnership with MSG Networks. And this is not some local news station. This is a massive network. MSG is, if you guys aren't aware, is the biggest, I would say, television entertainment provider in the New York area. They're the provider for the New York Rangers. They're the provider for the Knicks down there. A massive thing. To add Rugby New York to that lineup, it can only benefit them in the exposure that they'll get in bringing in new eyes in the New York area, at least. So despite seeing that, not so positive news with the Gilgronis losing that partnership with that local news channel, I think I trade that in every day of the week to see that Rugby New York is partnering with a globally recognized entertainment partner in Madison Square Garden network. It'll be exciting to see how they grow.
Now, have they said anything about I guess they wouldn't probably want to pull games off of the Rugby Network, because I know they do I'm pretty sure they're like Direct TV and all that.
Well, see, the thing is, Vandy, is the partnership, at least from what I understand, if there's any games that are airing nationally, right, those are withheld from being streamed on the Rugby Network for 24 hours. However, that doesn't include these local games. So I believe the games that are being played, and I believe this happened this past weekend, the game was aired on MSG, but because it's a locally covered game, like MSG is not available everywhere, right? You can only watch MSG in New York. So that's not considered that's not considered a nationally covered game. So you can still watch that live on the Rugby Network. But a lot of these, let's say a lot of the Giltinis games have been going on Fox Sports 2. Those are the nationally covered games, those Fox Sports 2 games. So those ones are not available until 24 hours after. And I will say, it makes my life harder when those games aren't available till 24 hours.
I was wondering why. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, there are some games that you'll realize that you'll try to look for going back, and then you'll be like, oh crap, like that game's not there. It's most likely because it was the nationally covered game. You got to wait 24 hours before it's available. So so that might be why. But yeah, some exciting stuff there. MSG being partnered with Rugby New York. Add them with the other formidable, marquee names with the New York Rangers, New York Knicks, and now Rugby New York. It is pretty cool to see that name is now amongst the high marquee names like the Knicks and Rangers, which is pretty awesome. So with that being said, that's the news and notes. We'll continue to monitor that throughout this episode to make sure if anything drops here that we keep you up to date. And obviously we'll go through that every episode and make sure that you're up to date with the latest happenings in the league. But I think it's now time to move on here, Vandy, to round 13 and the fantasy performances that happened this past week. Kind of all over the place when it comes to the different types of performances in our fantasy league, but there definitely wasn't a shortage of fantasy points for some people, including the very guy that isn't here right now. And just leave it to him, right? Leave it to Matt to have basically his best week ever and one of the best weeks ever in the history of our league, and for him to be a no-show. But maybe that's just him, and maybe it's part of him being in the mountains of British Columbia that had to do with this win. But we'll talk about some of the guys that contributed to that big win. And Vanny, as you can see here, I can see that you're if you're watching the YouTube video, I can see that you're wearing the Colorado Avalanche jersey. You're really hyped up for your boys' favorites, I think, to win the Stanley Cup. So I love the support there. I had to throw on the Hawaiian shirt here. Round 13 hyped me way too much up. There was such good weather. I was watching the games outside on my iPad. It was perfect. So I'm in the summery mood, man. So let's get through these matchups here and let's get some good vibes going here. Summer's here. The good weather's here. Rugby weather is official here. None of these cold, wacky, sideways, wind-blowing games that we were seeing earlier in the season. Everything was looking pretty stellar here, at least where I'm at heading in. So let's get into some of these nice matchups. Remember, on bye here, the Toronto Arrows, Houston SaberCats, Old Glory DC. Those were some of the bye teams that happened this week. The first game on the docket, and I think the game that everyone was looking most forward to, Rugby Atlanta taking on the LA Giltinis. absolutely nuts. I think this game lived up to expectation. And I want to do a subtle plug here too, as well, before we actually get into breaking down this matchup. For those of you who weren't aware, I was invited on to MLR All Access, MLR's flagship show last week on Tuesday, to talk about my predictions heading into round 13. And the hardest matchup for me to discuss, I think, was this Rugby Atlanta LA Giltinis match, just because it was so tight knit. Teams from last year that went to the final. Both teams are kind of really hot right now. They're picking up the pace. Hard for me to choose between these teams. I went with the LA Giltinis, and I proved to be right. And the reason why I'm saying this, the subtle plug, is I went 5 for 5 on that prediction show. Oh yeah, there we go. Round of applause. I had to flex. A little bit. Wasn't gonna leave that with being unsaid. So I went 5 for 5 there. That includes this matchup, which I was the most worried about. LA Giltinis taking on Rugby Atlanta, and like I mentioned, Giltinis coming out on top, 31-19. I'm going to break down all the fantasy performances for you here, but Vandy, want your initial thoughts on what we thought was going to be an exciting matchup, and ended up being pretty exciting. Mind you, it was mostly exciting because of how explosive the Giltinis were off the bat, and they really owned the start of this match for a majority of it.
Yeah, I would say at least, I would say probably the first 15 minutes was domination from LA, like pure domination. It definitely didn't get out of hand. Not that Rugby Atlanta was playing bad, just like I say every week, just this hard-nosed rugby that LA plays. Domination of their forwards. They let their backs kind of just sit idle while they kind of bump and bruise, and then get them in when they're probably within the 20-30 meter mark. Yeah, I mean, the red card from Hanko was big. That got Rugby Atlanta right back in the game. I believe they scored 2 tries actually after. So, I mean, that kind of opened the door for him, being down a guy, obviously. But, a couple cool tries. You know, that no-look pass from that Tiffet.
Oh, Joe Toffetti? Yeah, Big Joe.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
And then that Goddard with that cheeky little boot, no-looker, back kick to Jordan Trainer. That was pretty nice. But yeah, awesome game to watch.
Yeah, no, it was pretty fun stuff. I mean, the big thing for me here is, I think now, and I wish we had Matt on the show here to talk about this, because he, I think, was the one that needed the most convincing with his Giltinis team. But I think for me now, despite all the weekly lineup changes, and we're going to get into it, despite all this other, the injuries that they've been facing, I think they proved it to me now, man. This Giltinis team, maybe outside of the New England Free Jacks, I think I have the most confidence with this team heading into the playoffs as of right now. Outside of the New England Free Jacks, despite of how they looked earlier in the season, they looked shaky. They were dropping some pretty crucial matchups that they shouldn't have been dropping. But the way they've looked this past few weeks, and then going on bye, taking that extra time to prepare and showing up, not only showing up and winning the match this past weekend, but showing up and really dominating for the majority outside of what you're saying, Vandy, once they got that red card. But really just showing that performance, it was really cool to see, and it really put a stamp on it for me to finally say, you know what, I can finally trust this Giltinis team, and I'm not going to doubt them moving forward.
That being said, discipline still needs to get in check. Another week of poor discipline, but I mean, that's fair enough. And discipline, we've seen it in the season, throughout the season. Usually the matches that the Giltinis find themselves close in or end up even losing is because of their discipline. They get a card. They were man down this past week, like you mentioned, Vandy, Hanko getting that red card that we talked about earlier. And it was really unnecessary, like we mentioned. So you obviously don't want to see it. You can also argue those are easy things to fix. You just, got to think twice before doing those things. And usually those are things that you can figure out.
Exactly, heading into playoffs, especially when more things are on the line, you tend to act a little bit more disciplined. Now it's easier to say and assume that. Whether or not we'll see that from this Giltini squad, that'll be a whole nother story, but we'll see in a few weeks' time. But yeah, this team's looking hot, man. So let's go through it first here. Giltini's performances, Jordan Trainer looking really good, 12.6 fantasy points. He scored 2 tries there. He might be a sought-after free agent looking into it. When the Giltinis start picking it up, you just want a piece of this lineup, and it doesn't seem like a guy in this lineup is necessarily going to hit every single week, but you want to have that possibility of having that guy. So if you are looking for a piece of the Giltini stock, Jordan Trainer is available, scored 2 tries. He looked heavily involved. Tom Mitchell, hadn't seen that name in a while, hadn't really had any fantasy impact at all this season so far, 10.6 fantasy points here. And then the 2 top performers for Rugby Atlanta, 6.8, 6.7 respectively, Matt Heaton and Vili Hilu, each scoring a try for Rugby Atlanta. And then go down the list. Harrison Goddard looking kind of worth that top pick now after having a decent performance this past week, and having 2 out of 4 solid performances over the past month. And then you look at John Ryberg. I wish Matt was on the show to see this, but he scored a burner there, just finishing it off, 6.5 fantasy points. So Ryberg now quiet the past 2 weeks, but he's had spurts of scoring tries, and Matt is in here to kind of face that challenge here, because he dropped him a while ago, and now someone else is reaping the rewards for that, despite it being on the bench of that person that picked him up. But regardless, so yeah, pretty big performance here by the Giltinis, 31-19 victory. Really proved a lot for me. Just some quick notes on kind of the game as a whole that we mentioned. These lineup changes, man, and Vandy, you kind of felt the brunt of it, and maybe not for this Giltinis team, but just fantasy lineups as a whole. Dude, I feel like for you, it just feels like you trying to get a starting 10 guys out, just period, is a challenge for you every week, whether or not those guys are actually starting, or just getting 10 guys that could score any fantasy points has been rough. I think it's been a challenge like that for other league members as well. You have started to see some league members resort to not playing a certain position, going without a second row player, or even resorting to being okay with playing bench guys, just being not willing to drop certain players because they're on bye, or, you want to wait it out. It's been tough. I can see it in a lot of these teams, and that includes, and I think a large part of that adds and feeds into that challenge, is how late some of these lineups are released with these teams. And even
killing me.
Right. And even, mind you, even these last minute changes. And the reason why I bring it up for this Giltini's Rugby Atlanta match particularly is because they released the lineup. The Giltinis released the lineup, and it had Luke Burden and Nathan Den Hout both slotted to Den Hout to come off the bench and Burden to start at 10. Now I watched the match. I throw on the match on the Rugby Network, throw it on my TV. And I'm seeing numbers on the field within the first couple minutes that I shouldn't be seeing. I'm seeing a 21 starting at 9. Taz Smith is already in. And I'm seeing Den Hout in there at number 19 already playing at flanker. And I'm like, wait, what the heck is going on?
And I started luckily,
yeah. So it's kind of 2 flip sides of the token.
Yeah.
Last minute change by the Giltinis. They decide to put Goddard at 10, sub in Taz Smith, take out Luke Burden. Still had him on the bench. For your positiveness, had Den Hout slotted in. Matt had Luke Burden. Luckily, he was able to switch him out before once he saw that. But man, these last minute changes, even lineups being announced last minute. I don't know if there's something that we can do from a functional standpoint from when it comes to the league. I was thinking maybe withholding waivers until the lineups are released, but that's very dependent on whether or not these teams actually get these lineups out, because often it's not even the day before. Like, it's like literally the morning of they're releasing these lineups. There obviously isn't a rule, and obviously there's an advantage, I guess, a tactical advantage in releasing lineups as close as you can. But at least from a fantasy perspective, and Vandy, I'll let you speak on it now, it's tough, man, trying to figure out who's going in your lineup when you don't even know who's going to be starting on that week, and being that top 15.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't frustrating. It's definitely frustrating, but you touched on it. It's happening to multiple lineups. So I'm not going to play the woe is me card, but yeah, I mean, it makes it hard for certain positions, especially when there's so few of them. That when you have, I guess this week it helped because my scrum half, all of a sudden I went from having no scrum halves to now I was balancing back and forth between this guy, picked up Nola's number 9 there for a bit, dropped him. But, it makes everything spontaneous, but it makes somebody like me who doesn't quite know exactly what he's got in some of these bench stashes, it makes me quick on the trigger to drop him, and mistakes have been made like that. So it's tough, but it's learning curve. It's happening to everybody. So.
I mean, that's a great point, Vandy. Like, it is happening to everyone in our league, so it's not like anyone has a particular advantage. It literally does come to that, Vandy. It comes down to kind of your knowledge around it, and a guy like Hokie or a guy like Steven in our league who's digesting content what seems like 24/7 and is on this league every single second. It's hard to compete with that because they're hopping on these guys that are, maybe not starting, but they have heard wind of something where, they're maybe going in the lineup or what have you. I mean, funny thing I should mention too. Right, for sure. And I will mention, I have had guys in our league as well tell me that they've literally messaged some of these players. Like I know Steven went out and messaged Connor Mooneyham and was like, hey dude, are you starting this week? And he actually got back to him and was like, yeah, I'm starting this week. So it is funny, and kind of having the small nature of the MLR and this fantasy league just starting, it's unique things like that we can get, which is kind of funny. But that being said, it is very tricky. I notice as commissioner and seeing kind of your flurry of lineup changes coming in on match day, and just like, oh my God, this guy's out. Okay, who am I slotted in? Oh crap, man. There's no scrum half available.
I feel like I'm bugging you, like I'm floundering like a fish.
No, and I mean that's the challenge that I took on here, and the commitment that I knew and the responsibility I knew I was going to make getting into this. But it is funny to see kind of you guys scrambling. 2 hours. It's all of you too. It's not just you, Vandy. It's Malcolm scrambling, Natty's scrambling, Hokie's scrambling. You guys are all trying to find that last matchup in.
San Diego left. I think I messaged you. I had to vent for like a message or two. I like tweaked out a bit, and then I'm like, all right, I needed that, bro. Here we go. This is what I need now.
And it's crazy. I don't blame you, man. It's frustrating. And part of it is obviously, us not, our league not being the most high tech. We're not getting these roster changes instantly. It's also on these teams who are not releasing. Like, there are teams that are, and I get it, right? Yeah. If you can just give us the lineup, a night before, even like the more early morning of, like I would say with at least within 12 hours of the match, I feel like that is like a reasonable enough ask. 24 would be even better. But I mean, Rugby New York is notoriously bad for this, releasing it pretty late. The Gilgronis have been pretty notorious for releasing late, and just it makes it tough for you guys to set your lineups.
Always day of.
Right. And I don't know if there's anything from a league standpoint that we can do to kind of even that playing field and maybe make it a little bit easier. Like I mentioned, maybe it's not running waivers until the lineups are released, or guys are on waivers until lineups are released, and then everyone has a fair shot at, the free agent guys. I don't know. And it's hard because you can't do that if it's the day of stuff. Yeah. So these are the little things
you can do as a commish.
Right. I mean, these are the little things we're trying to figure out, the brand new things, but this is a problem. And the reason why we're spending so much time on it is this is a problem that I have noticed that has been growing as of late, where these lineups are being released later, especially with a lot of teams on bye. These are challenges that you guys are facing that is making it difficult, which, I mean, to be fair, can be a turnoff from playing in a fantasy league. If you're setting a lineup every week, Vandy, and every week I'm telling you, nah, man, sorry, that guy's not playing. Nah, man, sorry, that guy's not playing. Nah, man, sorry, that guy's not playing. It can get frustrating, like you said, and it might turn off your appeal to, making the commitment to playing fantasy rugby. So it is something to keep an eye out, but just something that we definitely had to touch on.
I refuse to be wavered.
There, I love the confidence with your Utah Warriors team, which we'll get to in just a few moments here, and your confidence in staying committed to fantasy rugby. Absolutely love it. That's why this thing has been so successful as it has going forward so far. And then just something too that I wanted to touch on before we move on to this next matchup here. I think so far the best series of rugby that has been played in the MLR happened within the 65th minute, around the 65th minute mark of of this Giltinis Rugby Atlanta match. If you want a little bit taste of what it could be in the MLR, watch this little series. Giltinis was down a man with the Hanko Gramish's red card. But just the physical nature, the defense that the Giltini was showing to not let up. It took forever for Rugby Atlanta to build the series, to build the phases, to finally get into the try zone. But it was a really good series. So check that out if you wanted a taste of kind of the best of the best when it comes to the MLR around the 65th minute of that match. I wanted to kind of make that clear because, hey, maybe there's brand new rugby fans that want to get a more taste of what good rugby looks like. And that little series there within that part of that match was definitely something that you can use as an example of that. So let's move on to this next matchup. And we talked about Utah Warriors, New England Free Jacks. You know, it was tough, and I predicted this, Vandy, going into this week. I didn't think that the Utah Warriors were going to have enough coming into it. The way I see it, Vandy, before, and I want you to touch on most of it. It is your boys. It's the Utah Warriors boys that you love so much, and you've stuck by so far, 13 weeks into the season. I don't think, Vandy, this was so much a Utah Warriors loss as it was just another display of New England Free Jacks dominance. Because, 100%. Man, what this team is able to do, and I feel like we talk about this every single week, but what this team is able to do on a week in and week out basis it's mind-boggling to me. I mentioned it earlier in the show how the Giltinis are really showing me that now they're a team to trust. And really, the Giltinis would be the only team that win this. But the New England Free Jacks have been showing every single week that they have this ability to do that. So I can't waver my trust from them. And it's interesting because the Free Jacks have this ability, right? Not only are they a very stout team, and it seems like they don't have many weaknesses in many spots, right? They also have this explosive playability, right? That we talked about every single week, where at any given time, they are able to just pop off for a 50-meter try that's just going to add to the lead that they already have. They showed this weekend that they can piece it all together on top of adding their set piece on top of that.
Yeah, that set piece try was beautiful.
This team is by far the best team in the MLR right now. Right. And maybe if the Giltinis and the Free Jacks were to play 10 times, maybe the Giltinis edge them out 6-4, something like that. But at least from what we've seen all season long, I cannot question this Free Jacks team. They are the best team in the MLR right now. They can piece everything together. It's just incredible. So with that being said, Vandy, I think it was more of a Free Jacks win so much as a Utah loss. But why don't you talk a little bit about your boys, the Utah Warriors, and kind of what they showed this past weekend, and if there's some optimism being showed for these Utah Warriors, both from an MLR perspective, but also from a fantasy perspective too.
Yeah, I mean, you still got, I guess the fantasy perspective is still there. They still got good guys, Calvin Whiting, Mika Cruz, Fisher, Mike Teo, Lance Williams. Like, these guys, they're good enough for fantasy yet. I wouldn't give up on fantasy, but the problem is they all just seem like individual pieces trying to do it. Mike Teo will break through the line almost so fast and almost not. I don't want to say uncharacteristic.
Oh, it just seems like we lost Vanny there. Hold on, no, you're right back, man.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah. So I don't want to say like it's out of character for obviously for Mike Teo to go in and make a big play, but it's almost out of character this year where it doesn't seem like there's follow-up. There's no buddy with him. McEnany's got the speed, but he's not there. And then, it might be a nice little kick play or whatever, but then nobody goes, and it just feels so divided. Like, it's not like you're watching a cohesive unit. It's just so fragmented. And then when you on the other side of the ball, you have these beautiful plays from, Bowden Waka. And then even when Paula Bellacchina got that yellow card, we still couldn't really muster anything. And it's like, come on, man. Like,
yeah, it's the way I
still can't muster anything.
And again, I'll preface this by saying, for everyone who's listening, it is against New England Free Jacks, so it's a tall ask. But the way I see it, Vandy, and I think it got emphasized even more so in this game, to me, the Utah Warriors are essentially the New England Free Jacks without the consistency. The Utah Warriors have the ability to explode for these fantastic plays. They have the players to go up. Mike Teo at any, I mean, we saw it in the 2 tries that we saw in this match. I mean, Mike Teo popped off, right? Found open space, offloads it to McEnany. McEnany brings it in for the try. Like, you're seeing these explosive play ability.
Yep.
Like you're saying, Vandy, they're just not able to string it together for a prolonged period of time. Like, I feel like they're not able to, on those times when they can't rely on those, explosive plays, are they able to, grind out a 10-phase play and really build up the phases there and maintain possession and work down a team so that when, those plays aren't working, you're still able to score those dirty tries. That's what New England has, and that's what Utah is still trying to find.
Well,
And I think that was really highlighted in this match. Yeah.
I would say another tough thing is our forwards don't seem to. This is gonna be tough because I don't quite know enough, but it doesn't seem they have the aggression that these other ones do. Like our top tacklers never seem to be our forwards. They always. Well, I shouldn't say never seem to be the forwards. Calvin Whiting he's dominant usually with tackles, but I guess he's a center. But I don't know, man. I would expect front row, second row guys to be a little bit more. I don't think you could find a guy in our front or second row that even would be top 5 for hitting. Maybe Bailey Wilson. Maybe.
Right.
Yeah. But other than that, your top hitters are probably Calvin Whiting, Lance Williams, and Tyler Fisher. And those guys, if we want them to make plays, we can't have them tackling 16 times a game. It doesn't make sense to me. Like I said, it's fragmented.
And something that we've seen very clear, obviously, for a team to be successful in this league is that it looks like you're going to need a little bit of physicality to be able to
100%.
go through this league. I mean, we'll touch on it with the Gil Cronies. They've shown their ability to be, defensive and really physical in matches prior. They had to get defensive and physical in this past week against the Seattle Seawolves. We'll get into that. But it seems like a lot of these really, really good teams, the New England Free Jacks showed it in this match, with their set piece, really mauling it out and really grinding it out. They showed that they can get physical too. A lot of these top tier teams show that they have that ability, especially within their forward pack. And yeah, if that's what the Utah Warriors and that's what you're seeing, Vandy, that's not a recipe for success. But
exactly.
Yeah, just to touch on some guys from a fantasy perspective, at least, Peter Jansen, he was the biggest benefactor of the New England set piece, 11.8 fantasy points. I believe he scored both of those tries off of a set piece maul play. So he was really the biggest beneficiary of the New England set piece, at least in this past week. Caleb McEnany, big pickup by Rugby Morning heading into this week. I know Matt dropped him because he needed the space. It seems like he's not kicking anymore, but he was able to score a pretty decent try, 8.8 fantasy points. Like we said, it was like a 25-meter try offloaded by Mike Teo. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. And I'll mention it too, right? The way that our fantasy, and not only did this New England Free Jacks Utah Warriors match highlight kind of the differences between these two teams, but talking about a fantasy perspective, what this also highlighted is, man, how badly I want to incorporate other stats into this league. Like how badly I want to have meters run in this league. Like, I mean, you've seen it before. I mean, who's on your team that is like a leader in meters run? Roberts Tanana.
Yeah, Roberts Tanana.
He's I believe I saw a ranking that was released earlier this week about how he's like one of the top meters run, right? And I'm looking at this. I'm watching this match, and it was kind of emphasized in the Rugby Atlanta, or excuse me, not the Rugby Atlanta match, a different match. But man, imagine if Bodine Walker, you'd be able to like capitalize on that big run. He gets nothing from that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he doesn't, he gets a try assist for offloading. But there are other tries where when we talk about the San Diego Legion match, I mean, Thomas Aoki goes on a fat run, offloads it, and then it gets offloaded again.
Right back. Yeah.
Right. And then it's just like, man, you're going on these big runs. Biggest reason why the try happened, but you're not seeing any points from it. So obviously from a fantasy perspective, that's something as a commissioner I want to change. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
We knew that being said,
we're playing with the rules.
Points. Yep.
We're playing with the rules that we're playing with. Continuing with the guys here, Mitch Wilson, 8 fantasy points. You're happy to see that, Vandy. He had a try assist, a nice try assist, and then also scoring a nice little try there as well. Joe Mano, he's a new name that we haven't seen yet this season for Utah. 5.6 fantasy points this past week, scoring a try. And then down the list, Slade McDowell scoring a try as well. And hey, we might not see him at the top of the list. He's still at the top of our rankings, at least as of now for our fantasy rankings, but Bodine Waka with the boot doesn't need to do anything else with it. 5 fantasy points once again. Yeah, he hasn't really done much these past weeks, but man, I'm looking at his numbers, dude.
So
it's pretty crazy, man. And he has 112 fantasy points on the season. I think that's like 40 points more than the next guy, which I believe is still Joe Peterson. I'm gonna get into that, but dang, just crazy every time I check out this guy's numbers. So pretty 100%. Incredible. But yeah, Free Jacks getting a big win over the Utah Warriors, 33-17. Let's move on to this next one. I think this just reinforces what we've been kind of saying for the past 3 weeks, Vandy. Dallas Jackals taking on the San Diego Legion in Arlington. I mean, we expected this. 53-14 win for the San Diego Legion. It's looking more and more every single week that no matter who it is, you are playing your San Diego Legion players you are playing whatever team is facing the Dallas Jackals that week, you are facing those players. Now, why Vandy is rubbing his eyes and looking distressed is because it is a known fact here all season long that Vandy is the biggest investor, I should say, into the San Diego Legion. And I think you can probably pull the bite from last episode, the optimism of Vandy with, oh man, it's finally my time to shine. The San Diego Legion are facing this Dallas Jackals. All my boys are going to start. I'm going to feed off of this. And it couldn't be coming at a better time too, Vandy, because you're taking on Hokie, who is, as you've mentioned, I can quote you saying, is the quote unquote Adam Schefter of fantasy rugby, at least when it comes to the MLR. You were looking for all the help you can get, and your boys San Diego Legion taking on Dallas Jackals was a big help in that. But those players that you have need to be on the field for them to be making that impact. And I guess the Legion also got the message as well, where they're like, hey, you know what? The Dallas Jackals aren't that great. Maybe this is a good opportunity to rest our best guys. And yeah, all of the guys that Vandy had, Bjorn Basson, Joe Peterson, and not
a bit ago.
Yeah, not making an appearance in, or they make an appearance, but not starting in this one. But to make matters even worse, the guy who goes out and sends the message in the bottle from the mountains of British Columbia, and I get a little tiny message.
I'm picking up the rest of the
coming
Legion.
in. Yeah, I'm picking up the rest of the San Diego Legion boys of whoever's not available. And literally, no joke, Vandy, every single San Diego Legion guy, except for Tian Lutz. So maybe there's a good thing that you didn't pick him up, Vandy. But except for Tian Lutz, who got a yellow card, every single San Diego Legion guy that Matt picked up scored a try.
Yep.
Leading to a historical performance by Matty, which we'll get into in Commissioner Yee's league update. But yeah, I guess we talked about a crystal ball that was being handed out in our league. I think it was John 1 week for predicting the Lords Vanderskiff pickup, and then I think a week ago it was Rugby Morning who made a big pickup, and then this week apparently Matt has that crystal ball because he was able to see every single player on San Diego Legion who was going to score a try. Now, not. It was against the Dallas Jackals, so I don't know if there was much crystal ball predicting that needed to be had there, but nonetheless, he nailed it. Yeah, he made some solid pickups. And I want to, before we get into the specific breakdown of this match and the fantasy performances, Matt did have a message for all of our league members that he wanted to send as he was in, or as he's in the mountains of British Columbia, finalizing his self-healing process before he makes a return in next week's episode. Yeah, Matt will be back next week's episode. He says he says the only host that knows how to put on a show with a team full of San Diego players.
Oh,
He's the only host on this show that knows how to put on a show with a team full of San Diego players. Obviously, a direct call out to Vandy there. So he may not even be here, but he's finding a way to get under your skin, Vandy, eh?
Deserve every minute of it.
Absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, crazy. So yeah, New England Free Jacks, Utah Warriors. So, Dallas Jackals, San Diego Legion, 53-14. Matt capitalizing on that. Obviously not what you wanted to see, at least with Vandy's turns, but unlucky when you have, guys sitting out, which is, I guess, predictable. If you had told me, last week whether or not, the Legion were going to be deciding to rest some of their guys because it was against the Dallas Jackals, you can kind of see it. Hindsight's 2020, but yeah, Vandy, I can feel you there. You definitely wanted to see those boys perform against the crippled team that is the Dallas Jackals. But overall thoughts of the San Diego Legion game, of those guys maybe that weren't on your team, but seeing a San Diego Legion side that you do still like.
Well, I was kind of hoping. Well, after I seen the lineup and seen I only had Nanu playing, I was kind of hoping for maybe a tryout of him, but guess not. Surprised I didn't get the yellow card he usually gets. No, I was pretty dominant performance. Dallas
It's what you expected, right?
Dallas Jackals just is basically the farm right now. You can just pick up whoever and play the lottery, and obviously Matt.
He played the lottery.
Bought a lottery ticket because he nailed every number, but hey, good on him. I mean,
exactly. And I'll go down the list. So Peter Malcolm, 12.5 fantasy points. He was the one guy that was actually already owned. Jason Higgins, Matthew had 11.1 fantasy points. Matthias Fryer, 7.6 fantasy points that Matt already had. This new guy, Motoko Nuduhu on Dallas. I mean, it seems like every week you're going to be able to maybe find one guy on the Dallas Jackals that makes some sort of fantasy contribution. I'm not sure that I advise our league members to bank on guessing who that guy is every single week. I mean, last week it was what was the name? It was Hill, right? Hayden Hill, I believe that was the benefactor of those points last week. This week it's Motoko Nuduhu. So we'll see whether or not someone can guess what happens in round 14. And then you look at some other guys. Ben Mitchell coming through, 7.2 fantasy points. He was scooped up by Matt. Chris Robshaw, he scored a try as well, 6.6 fantasy points. He was scooped up by Matt. So yeah, just a really, really good roster play there by Matty. But you really could predict this. Dallas continues to struggle. Not surprising, but I think the biggest thing here, like we say every single week, you're playing everyone you can against this Dallas Jackals team. And for everyone's information, it is the Seattle Seawolves that are playing the Dallas Jackals next week. So you'll get to start thinking about the Seawolves players that you'll want to pick up for these round 14 matchups. Let's get into Rugby New York. NOLA Gold now, Vandy, 36-28 in favor of Rugby New York. I think the score shows that it was a lot closer than it really was. Rugby New York really pulled away with things at the start there.
Yeah.
Man, I said it last show. I said it on the predictive show on MLR All Access. This Rugby New York team, they may have not been able to string the wins together. And I mentioned it before. My take is that the record that they have isn't really indicative of the talent level that this team really has. But in this game particularly, man, they showed how dangerous this backline can be.
Oh my god!
It is incredible, man. Like Emery finding that open space, and then getting it to open space for Pryor to score. I don't know if you saw Ed Fidow. The speed on him to go, like Andy Ellis, right? Wonderful boot. But by all means, he had no intention of one of his own players scooping that ball up. But Ed Fidow had that ability to go in there and chase that ball down when he couldn't. There was no expectation. What I'm saying for Andy Ellis to find a player, one of his own players, with that try. And for Ed Fidow, like,
That
Nola guy had a head start.
Yeah.
Like Nola had an Ed Fidel turn on the Jets, picking up the ball, taking it to the house, man. What an incredible try there.
In the try zone, he's like, "Yeah, come get me, boy."
Right, crazy. He went from a John Poland head pat from last week, and now he's putting that on. I mean, when you're scoring tries like that, I feel like you're allowed to kind of have that confidence and be able to do that. But yeah, to my point being. Rugby New York, it seemed like they were really dominant the whole way. Nola, they find ways to get tries here and there. There was a little period where they were slowly creeping back up in it, but I think
I should have kept Damian Stevens, man. That guy is.
Oh man, and we're gonna talk about in the waiver wire, dude. He turned it on that try. Oh yeah, he got through there, and it was funny when I first was watching. I thought he was gonna take it to the house on that, and then when I saw him pass it out, pass it out. I forget who it was. He passed it out wide, and then he ended up getting the fruits of his labor, getting it right back and being able to score that. So that was nice to see. But yeah, Damien Stevens turning it on there. But yeah, fantasy performers here. Dylan Fawcett. I mean, he scored the set piece try, and then he scores just a nice little easy 1 meter try there. 11.9 fantasy points. Got to be one of my favorite celebrations still in the entire MLR. It seems like the front row players of Rugby New York, as soon as they score a try, will continue sprinting right to half. As soon as they score it. So I love seeing Fawcett getting up there and just scoring. It's something about seeing just him so pumped up running all the way back to half. It's pretty funny seeing that. It does just emphasize how athletic this team is. I know we kid about how, it's Dylan Fawcett, it's the hooker running to half, but that doesn't diminish the point that I think this New York team is one of the most athletic teams in the MLR. Just from 1 to 15, their back line, their front line, it seems like their guys can really move around the pitch. They have the speed, they have the physicality, they have the size. It seems they're just a really athletic team, and it gives them the ability to score some of these big time tries and run very, very quickly to half, like no other team in the MLR, as Fawcett has chosen or has shown over the past season so far. Vandy, you mentioned Damian Stevens with a big try there. He's actually kicking too, which is kind of cool. So not sure if that's something that's going to be prolonged, because we've seen a multiple amount of guys kick on Nola, but 11 fantasy points for Damian Stevens, scoring the try, and I believe getting around 5 fantasy points from the boot as well. 9.3 fantasy points for Ed Fidel. Vandy, it was really cool to see that, your decision wasn't too hurt, because Andy Ellis still scoring 9.2 fantasy points, so you really can't be mad with that decision there. It was worrisome to kind of see that initial stat line of Andy Ellis getting subbed out and Damian Stevens kind of going in there, but Andy Ellis getting the early try there kind of calmed the nerves there a little bit to see, which was nice. And then 8.5 fantasy points for Cara Pryor, JP Eloff getting in there as well with 7.8 fantasy points, and then to round it off, Jack Hyden seems to be taking over kicking duties with Sam Windsor on the bench. He did a quite fine job, racking up 6.5 fantasy points for him there. And then the last matchup of round 13, and the one, honestly, that was probably the most surprising from a scoreline perspective. I was expecting this to be a lot more high scoring, but only a 17-6 scoreline in favor of the Gilgronis against the Seawolves. I was debating an upset here when I was making my predictions at the end. Had to go with Gilgronis. They're looking too good right now. A lot of the people think they're one of the best teams in the MLR, but they were able to squeak out a physical one here, 17-6. It's promising to see, though, Vandy, that their defense really come through, not allowing Seattle to cross that try line.
Yeah, and I don't think they got a point in that second half, like Seattle at all. Not even a kick, nothing.
Yeah. So. Yeah, pretty impressive stuff, man. Pretty impressive stuff by the Gilgronis. We've seen the offensive prowess on them, but to see them tied together now with the defensive stuff is pretty cool. Obviously, though, when you see these low-scoring score lines, 17-6, usually there's not many fantasy points to be had. Really, the biggest fantasy providers here were the two try scores on the Gilgronis, being Mark O'Keefe and Hugh Roach. Bryce. Yeah. Did
you hear that after Mark O'Keefe's try? What that announcer said?
No, what'd he say?
Bro, I literally laughed out loud, like watching the game. Because he scores a pretty tough try. Like he kind of pulls through some guys. And the commentator goes, I said it, I'll say it again. He goes, Marco Keefe is as tough as Nicolas Cage's face. And man,
Oh my
I
God.
had to rewind it because I didn't think I heard it right. I died. I couldn't hold it in.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh
we've
my
had
God.
our opinions about the commentating on this show before, but that's pretty funny.
That's the best thing I've heard from a commentator
that's pretty
in
jokes.
sports, for sure.
Well, that's yeah. Nicolas Cage's
You gotta
face.
make that a sound bite, man. Like,
all right, we'll go back. We'll get a soundbite high. So that will be
got like 8 tries. The man's deserves it.
all right. Well, we'll make sure to get that onto next show. But that's pretty funny.
Oh, I died.
But yeah, Hugh Roach getting into 6 points there. I will mention Bryce Campbell making a pretty big fantasy impact too. 5 fantasy points. Didn't score a try, but he was involved in both of those Hugh Roach and O'Keefe tries. He was the guy that offloaded the tries there. Basically identical tries, both of them. They were like right in front of the post, offloaded by the 5-meter line. Both of them were by Bryce Campbell. And then AJ Alatimu was really the only fantasy contributor on the Seattle side off of the boot. Obviously, Seattle not scoring any tries, so it was really only Alatimu with his 3.5 fantasy points coming off of injury the week prior. So it's cool to see his contributions immediately back into the lineup after missing a week due to injury, but obviously not the fantasy performance overall that you want to see from your Seattle Seawolves players. So 17-6 for the Gilgronis. And that's round 13, man. Pretty crazy stuff, dude. Pretty exciting matchups. Thought we had a lot of interesting finishes, but as you can see, pretty chalk, man, because I was 5-4-5 in my predictions. So what can I say? I'll give my own pat on the back for that, because I don't think I'm going to get that from you,
pat you on the back.
or Matt. But all right, guys. Well, it's your favorite time of the show. It took us a little bit longer to get here because we had so much to talk about of those matchups. But it is Commissioner Yee's classic update of the league. Hear ye, hear ye. Here is Commissioner Yee with round 13's league update. It was an exciting one. Had some big fantasy scoring for some teams and some teams not so much. But we're going to start off with matchup number 1. Lads on Tour taking on Ruck and Roll. And Lads on Tour coming into this week needing a win to stay atop of the standings. But he wasn't able to get it. Something Matt did over the weekend in British Columbia when he was praying to the fantasy rugby gods pulled through, because the crystal ball that he had over the weekend in order to foresee the players he needed to pick up to get back in to the win column. He had it this week, picking up Ben Mitchell, Chris Robshaw, Cara Pryor. Big fantasy scores for them: 7.2, 6.6, 8.5. Pretty crazy stuff. The biggest fantasy scorer, Jason Higgins, 11.1 fantasy points. The biggest fantasy score for Lads on Tour was the 9.3 he put up, which attributed to almost half of the 26.9 fantasy points that was had for Lads on Tour, but obviously not enough to surpass the 45 put on by Ruck and Roll. Moving on to matchup number 2, and I'm sorry, Vandy, Dankus Anchors taking on your Rucking Goat team. You had a good performance, man. 22.7 points. Andy Ellis looking good. That's a solid pickup. 9.2 points. Mitch Wilson finding the try zone. 8 fantasy points for him. But yeah, New England set piece and Peter Jansen really making it hard for you. 11.8 fantasy points, 6.5 fantasy points for Will Hooley. That's looking like a good pickup for Hokie and the Dankus Anchors. And without a second rower, the Dankus Anchors was still able to beat you, the Rucking Goat, Vandy. And I will say, and we'll get into it after this update, the bet that you have with Steven has just gotten a whole lot more interesting. And the tie that was had, our first ever league tie that happened in round 12 between Matt and Malcolm, may have a real big play in that as we approach the end of the season. So yeah, the Rucking Goat falling short to the Dankus Anchors, 34.4 to 22.7. Moving on to matchup number 3, the Feral Hippies taking on the Bing Bong Theory. And Bing Bong Theory going through some of those lineup challenges like we were talking about, only able to muster up 7 fantasy points. And when your top fantasy scorer score of the week is your set piece bonus point. That's never a good sign. 3 fantasy points for San Diego Legion, but it was 12.5 fantasy points for Peter Malcolm that basically sealed the deal. He could have done it all on his own, but with a little help from LaRue Malan, added a little bit of insurance there. So Feral Hippies takes down Bing Bong Theory 21.5 to 7. And then lastly, matchup of the week in round 13, at least from a fantasy perspective, Rugby Morning taking on Victoria's Secret. We thought this was going to be a tight matchup, but for some reason, and a red card to Henkel Gramicious does not help. A minus 7.5 fantasy points on the week to him. It added to just one single fantasy point for Malcolm, coming off that low tie last week, now only putting up fantasy points. And for someone who was leading the league of our standings a couple of weeks ago, finds himself struggling a little bit in this playoff race. Rugby Morning, I think, snuck himself back in the playoff standings. We'll check that in just a moment here with a big win against Malcolm. Statements play by Dylan Fawcett and Caleb McEnany, 11.9, 8.8 for them respectively, contributed to 32 points for Rugby Morning, getting the big W. So we have a look at the standings now. For all of you listening out there, we have a brand new top of the standings, and this is someone that was a top of the standings for a majority of the season, but he finds himself back up there. And I feel like, Vandy, we've been getting kind of a flip-flop of this top spot for the past few weeks now. It's making things dang interesting with only 2 weeks left to go in our fantasy MLR regular season. But yes, the Dankest Anchors find themselves atop of the rankings once again with an 8-5 record, 364.5 fantasy points for Lads on Tour. He has an 8-5 record as well, but it's the 343 points, total points for that's just not enough, sitting about 21 points behind Dankest Anchors. That has him fall one spot. So we'll see how that race goes to the end with that top spot still very much definitely on the line. And this is where the playoff race starts to heat up. Victoria's Secret now dropping from that second spot down to third. He now has a 7-5-1 record. Rugby Morning, after being out of the playoff spot, finds himself back up in the playoffs in the fourth spot. Rugby Morning with a 7-6 record. Bing Bong Theory also has a 7-6 record, but because of the total points for, he's sitting 50 points back of Rugby Morning. He's now out of the playoff picture, sitting in fifth spot. Despite having that same record, that 7-point total does not help him in this past week. And this is where it gets interesting. Feral Hippies, man, he is throwing a wrench in things. He has been absolutely rolling. I believe this is 3 straight weeks of wins for him. He's now at a 6-7 record, and it's not a far off thought to think that Steven can bring back the team that was once at the bottom of our rankings when he took over, at least in the bottom half of our rankings when he took over, can find his team back in the playoffs. Man, that would be incredible. It would require him to win out here, or some other scenarios to happen, but it's definitely not out of the picture. And then for those of you following along in the bet that was made last week between Steven and Vandy and involving Matt as well, for those of you who weren't there for the bet, essentially Steven said whoever finishes the season with a better fantasy record gets a jersey from Steven. He even showed the Utah Warriors jersey that he would show, or he would send to Vandy. Vandy, you just couldn't squeak out the win, man. And because Matt, he hasn't
against, okay,
he doesn't have he has the same amount of wins as you, but that tie that he had last week may be the killer for you. So he does find himself, because of that, just ahead of you in the standings now. He now, with that big 45-point performance, finds you ahead of you 2.2 fantasy points for. So he's ahead of you in that regard as well. Now, yeah, you just mentioned you do have the most points against you in our league. So that's tough. That means that people, for some reason, just love teeing off on the rookie this year for some reason.
I'm pretty used to it in fantasy.
You know what? I guess so. But yeah, so that's tough. But hey, the season's definitely not done. 2 weeks to go. Back and forth between you and Matt. I don't think you two face each other yet, or face each other for the rest of the season. But it's still very much in play here for who is going to get that jersey from Steven. And with that being said, that is your Commissioner Yee's update of the of round 13. Yeah, man, that bet is getting spicy, man.
Oh,
It is getting fun to watch, dude.
I need Joe.
And I'm gonna give a subtle shout out to my mom. So she listens to this episode, and she mentions to me, she goes, did Matt win this week? And I said, yeah, but unfortunately Vandy lost this week. And she goes, oh, what does that mean for Vandy's jersey? Like, is he still gonna get the jersey? And you're talking about this is Matt's mom, like her own son, and goes, oh no, I want Vandy to still get the jersey. I don't want Matt to be winning. So even my mom, even Matt's mom, is pulling for you to get this jersey.
We lived together for 4 years, okay? I'm like a long lost son she never had.
There we go. So yeah, your bet between you and Matt that Steven has ditched for you guys. It's gonna get pretty spicy here these last 2 weeks. It's gonna get fun.
If I got Joe, I'm not worried. But
I feel like you will have Joe. I do think that facing Dallas was part of the reason that went into that went. I mean, he did go on the field, so he got his minutes in, so he's not injured. Yeah, he did. He got like 15 minutes in. So, just to get the old legs, going, get the jog in.
Yeah, I still love the guy.
Oh, wait.
Hey, Joel, right. If you watch these, I still love you.
I will say the strategy that you had for him to get points when after he got subbed in, it would have worked. He just unlike him missed two conversion kicks. So he would have had some points, but he obviously missed those kicks. But yeah, coming down to the wire, guys, both in that bet between Matt, Vandy, and Steven, and also our fantasy playoffs. And like we mentioned, a lot of playoff clenching here. I mean, it is coming down to the wire. Rugby Morning, Victoria's Secret, Bing Bong Theory. I feel like they're clenching. You got Feral Hippies. He's clenching with 6 and 7. And I'm pretty sure Dankus Anchors, Lads on Tour with 8 wins too. They're clenching as well because they're feeling the heat of these guys chasing. No one has a spot locked in. The people not in playoffs can get in. The people in playoff spots right now can get out. I would say the only people that basically is a done for season is Ruck and Roll and the Ruck and Goat, but you guys still have that bet to play for, which is a nice offer by Steven here. Something. But yeah, it is something. I will say, Vandy, last question before we move on to waivers here quickly. How bad do you want that jersey? Yeah, I feel, dude, your first ever rugby kit, man. Like, yeah. And that's what my mom said is like, she's like, man,
at this Vandy point, needs. I'm trying not to get too excited.
Vandy needs that jersey way more than Matt needs that jersey. Obviously, you can see how many jerseys I have that I don't need anymore. Matt has his fair share of kit that he's built over the seasons. We need to get Vandy his first kit, and for that to be his very favorite team, I think it'd be something special. So I think all the viewers, all the listeners, they're all pulling for you, Vandy. Even my mom's pulling for you. Yeah. And hey, there's even a little bit of me that's pulling for you too. And it's not just because Matt isn't here right now that we can say that. So I promise that. So yeah, let's hop in quickly here to the waiver wire segment. Not going to spend too much time here because we do need to move on as this episode is running a little bit long here, and we do have a brand new segment to mention to you viewers here that we hope sticks a little bit. But yeah, waiver wire, when it comes down to the waiver wire, not much. We've mentioned this on all the shows basically these past few weeks. I think our fantasy managers are really getting a better idea of who's real and who's not, what players are having impacts in a fantasy landscape and who's not having that impact from a week in and week out basis. I think a lot of people have been a little bit more willing to move off of guys that haven't performed for them, and we're seeing them be prepared also for guys that they may have an affinity to that they're not seeing anymore. So yeah, I would say the only guys that I think really stick out to me in this waiver wire period, Vandy, and I think this has something to do with you, is Damian Stevens. Damian Stevens is sitting there in the waiver wire, and you don't need to comment on this because I don't want to reveal the play that you may or may not have for this guy heading into this waiver wire period. But you're talking about a guy that really fits your need. He's a scrum half. It seems like to be getting minutes. The prior weeks he's been flopping between Damian Stevens and Devereaux Ferris. I don't know what it has to be, what is there. But when you have the athleticism that he's shown, at least in this past week especially, he's also kicking. It's hard not to take a flyer on him, and to see him in the free agency period this late into the season is also promising as well.
The only thing about him would be he doesn't play next week. So he's only actually technically got one game left in the season.
True. Fair enough. That's a really good point as well. So that's something that fantasy managers in our league are going to have to pay attention to. The guys that are on bye, the guys that are suspended, who are going to make an impact, especially because you'll need these guys in your playoff race. And even for some people, maybe Hokie and maybe John are looking a little bit further because their playoff spot's a little bit more solidified. Looking ahead to some guys that might be available for them in their playoff run. That is something you'll definitely want to consider, Vandy. So that's a really good point. Some other guys that you might want to consider, Jordan Trainer. He's had a few weeks of not really making an impact. He's on the field, and like I said, if you want a share of this Giltini side, he's a guy that you could use to have that. Scoring big this past week in 2 tries, 12.6 fantasy points, and it seems like he does stay on the field for the full 80 minutes, racking up 1 point here and there. So at the very least, it seems like he's getting you that crucial 1 point. Will McGee, he was on the field as well. 2.5 fantasy points for this past week, but just to see a fly half that was making an appearance, I know that is a big need in this past week. But outside of those names, not really quite sure if there's anything else out there for our fantasy owners. And like I mentioned, for our league members, you will want to go through these rankings that we have posted in our spreadsheet, and don't just sort by the total points. You will also want to just kind of look at the trends of their weekly play, because there are guys that are heating up here that have played these past few weeks consistently, that if not scoring tries, they have been racking up these 80-minute points, which I feel like is huge in some of these tighter matchups. So you'll want to check that out. And also a reminder for our league managers too, that quickly here, that you'll be able to download the spreadsheet as well. So if you want to make your own changes to the spreadsheet, you can go on there, download it, and then make your own changes and have your own resource that you can make your own changes to. So it's just something that I wanted to point out there. So yeah, have a check on the waiver wire. Those waivers will be going through Thursday night at midnight Eastern time as always. So make sure to get those claims in. And then Vandy here, as we wrap up the show, just wanted to look ahead here to round 14. And this is something new that we are going to start doing here going forward. And I thought it would be a nice little element to add a little bit of substance to this predicting show, considering that I did so well, went 5 for 5 on the MLR All Access show. I thought that I was only right to introduce a predictive segment here. So at least I can be a little bit more involved and show you guys up with some predictions. So if for those of you that are listening that are maybe not aware and are not involved in the MLR Reddit community, there is someone on the Reddit community that I've talked with. He was initially going to maybe be a part of this league, but due to circumstances, we had to go in different directions. But he does do this thing called Tackle the Numbers, and this is Oddball Gentleman on Reddit, and he has this website called tacklethenumbers.gloriousrugby.com, and he has a bunch of really cool stats on there. So you'll want to check that out. He has like playoff chances, control, all these cool stats. But one of the cool things on there that he does is he has, after you make an account, you can play his pick game, and he basically, I don't know how he does it. Obviously, there's a lot of coding and stats that goes behind it. But he basically, like betting, like sports betting, he creates a spread for these matches that happen on a weekly basis. And you make picks. And it tracks your picks. It tracks who's doing the well all season long. And we thought we'd take our crack at it. So we're going to try doing it with the last 5 weeks here of the regular season. And then hopefully it'll become a consistent thing going forward into next season as well, and something that we can track going forward. So with 5 weeks to go, we'll see between Vandy, myself, and Matt who can do the best here. So let's go quickly through this, Vandy, to wrap up this show. We got 6 really good matchups: New England Free Jacks, Old Glory DC, Utah, Rugby Atlanta, Toronto, Rugby New York, San Diego Legion, Houston, Giltinis, Gilgronis, Seattle Seawolves, and Dallas Jackals. Like you mentioned, the NOLA Gold are on bye. Before I ask you what game you're looking most forward to, let's go through each one and talk about our picks. We'll talk about New England Free Jacks, Old Glory DC first. I mean, this is really easy to say. I have New England. Matt has New England. Who do you got?
New England.
Yeah, I mean, New England, we mentioned it. Don't need to touch more. Best team, I think, right now in the MLR. DC, one of the bottom tier teams right now when it comes to performance, despite having won the 2 weeks before round 13. I don't think they'll find themselves back in the win column in round 14. Okay, Vandy, Utah, Rugby Atlanta. I mean, I know you want to root for your boys, but it's tough, man. Despite Rugby Atlanta losing to the Guiltinis, they're still a really good team. I have Rugby Atlanta winning in this one. Matt has Rugby Atlanta winning in this one. What do you got?
Rugby Atlanta. Sorry, boys. I got to do it.
Yeah, Rugby Atlanta. This one's an interesting one. Toronto taking on Rugby New York. Toronto's back at home, and we know how well they're playing back in Toronto. So I have Rugby New York. I just think that backline is just too good, and they're looking really good. Matt has Toronto. Who do you got?
Really?
Yo, yeah, because of that home stat, I think he's siding with the Arrows there.
Sure. Rugby. New York.
Rugby New York. Yeah, pretty chalk there. They look like the better team. But hey, maybe Toronto does pull one out of the bag there because of the home field advantage. They do look like a completely different team when they play 100%. North of the border. So it will be interesting to see what they do. And they're coming off of a bye. So really a lot of things are working in Toronto's favor. So hey, maybe Matt squeaks out one there. Here we got San Diego Legion taking on the Houston SaberCats. I got San Diego. It's going to be a tight one. This is a huge playoff race match. And I will say with that Toronto Arrows Rugby New York one, that's a huge playoff race matchup too. Arrows are 6-5, Rugby are 7-4. They're right on that playoff cusp. Here, the Legion and the SaberCats, they're on that Western Conference cusp, 6-6, 6-5 respectively. So this one's going to have a huge indication on who can kind of squeak in. I got San Diego Legion. Matt's got San Diego Legion. Who do you got?
Houston.
Wow. Okay. I like that. I like it. This will be interesting. So we're going to have different plays here. That'll be good. And hey, man, with the way Houston's been looking in some portions, they could, and they're coming off the bye too, so they'll be rested up.
They're my dark horse team, bro. They're my dark horse team.
And I will say, maybe Steven, the Feral Hippies, owner of the Feral Hippies, his fandomship of the SaberCats, you saw all his jerseys that he had last episode in his camera shot. Maybe his fandomship is rubbing off of you a little bit here, Vandy. So yeah, that's I'm sure he'll be happy to hear that too. This one's a great one. Guiltinis taking on the Gilgronis, basically a top Western Conference matchup. It's going to be a tight one, but I just think, like I said, it's hard to bet against this Guiltinis team. They're hot. They're picking it up. I know it's hard to bet against this Gilgronis team, but it seems like the Guiltinis seem to be on this upswing. I got to go Guiltinis with this one. Matt goes Guiltinis. Yeah. What do you have? Guiltinis too. All right, that's tough, man. I feel like we're
so good right now.
I know. If there's one game I feel like we're gonna be bit by, it's gonna be this game because the Gilgronis can easily win this match with how good they've looked as well. So
and their defense against Seattle that's notable, man.
And I'm gonna not even touch. It's not even spend a second on this one. Seattle taking on Dallas. I mean Seattle. Who do you got?
Dallas plays.
Yeah, I mean, you got Seattle. Yeah. So those are our picks. We're going to announce those on social media. And we're going to track those at least for the rest of the season here. And remember, that website is tacklethenumbers.gloriousrugby.com. We're going to make accounts. We're going to start getting ourselves involved with this with 5 weeks left to go in the season. Should be fun. Should be competitive. Add a little thing to chirp each other on, and hopefully we can carry this into next season as well. I will say with these picks and with the website, like I mentioned, it does come a spread along with it, so you're not just making the pure winner out of this. You have to take the spread into account. The spreads have not been released yet for as at the time of us making this recording this podcast, so our picks may get updated based on those spreads, but like I said, we'll announce those final spreads with those picks on social media, and we're going to keep track of those picks for the rest of the season. So with that being said, man, it's going to be an exciting round 14, dude. A lot of exciting matchups. Really looking forward to Toronto Rugby New York. Really looking forward to Guiltinis, Gilgronis. Playoffs are on the line, both in the MLR and in our fantasy league, man.
Hell yeah!
It's going to be an exciting one, man. Going to be really good. Any last words here, dude?
No, I mean, bring on week 14. Hopefully, I win that jersey.
We'll see. Yeah, the race is definitely still very much on between Maddie and yourself, Vandy. But yeah, with that being said, Matt will be back from his self-healing trip next week on the episode. We'll see what he has to say. We'll see whether or not he can win 2 in a row. That would be unheard of. And I couldn't even imagine what the heat that he's going to bring on if he does win back-to-back wins. And we'll see whether or not you can get in the win column. And yeah, good luck to all of our other league members in round 14. And to all of our listeners, thank you for following along this fantasy rugby journey. For Devin Vandy Vanderpool, for Matt Yee, I'm Ryan Yee, and we will see you next week.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.